The sun rises over the baked plains of Mesopotamia, casting long shadows across the ruins of Ur. Beneath the parched earth of modern Iraq lie thousands of clay tablets, etched with the wedge-shaped script of the Sumerians. These records, dating back 5,000 years, speak of a social order established by the heavens themselves. While empires rise and fall into the dust of history, a silent thread connects the kings of old to the architects of the modern world. Researchers now look to these ancient archives to uncover a startling proposition. They describe 12 distinct lineages, or bloodlines, chosen to steward the resources and secrets of civilization. Today, these ancestral currents continue to flow beneath the surface of global politics and finance. We trace the origins of power back to the cradle of civilization, exploring how these 12 ancient families influence the destiny of humanity. The sun hangs heavy over the scorched plains of southern Iraq, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the mounds of Tel Abu Sharain. Here, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers once wound through a lush garden of reeds and silt, the earth holds a silent, stony secret. For thousands of years, the world moved forward, oblivious to the library of clay buried beneath its feet. It was not until the mid-19th century that the silence was broken. British archaeologists, digging into the heart of ancient Nineveh and the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal, unearthed tens of thousands of clay tablets. These were not mere ledgers or tallies of grain. They were the surviving memory of a civilization that claimed to know the very architects of the human race. Among these artifacts, the cuneiform script reveals a narrative that predates the established histories of the West. The wedge-shaped marks, pressed into wet clay by the styluses of ancient scribes, speak of a time when the boundary between the divine and the terrestrial was thin. In these records, the gods are not distant metaphors. They are physical presences, characterized by their immense stature, their longevity, and their preoccupation with order and genetic lineage. Central to this narrative is the figure of Enki, the Sumerian lord of wisdom, fresh water, and the deep abyss known as the Abzu. If the tablets are to be taken literally, Enki was the master biologist of a prehistoric age, the guardian of the divine blueprints that would define the destiny of humanity. The translation of these texts in the late 19th century sent shockwaves through the academic world. When George Smith, a humble banknote engraver turned self-taught linguist, first deciphered the account of a great flood on a tablet from the library of Ashurbanipal, he reportedly became so overcome with excitement that he began to undress in the middle of the British Museum. He had found a precursor to the biblical narrative of Noah, but it was far older and far more detailed. However, beneath the story of the flood lay an even more provocative chronicle. The Sumerian accounts do not speak of a spontaneous creation of man by a singular deity. Instead, they describe a complex industrial effort by a group of beings known as the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. According to the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish, the Anunnaki were a hierarchy of celestial beings who descended to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago to mine the planet for its precious resources. When the lower ranks of these beings, the Igigi, revolted against their grueling labor, the leadership sought a solution. Enki, the scientist and diplomat of the gods, proposed the creation of a primitive worker, a being capable of performing the toil while possessing enough intelligence to follow the divine decrees. This was the Lulu Amalu, the first man. The tablets describe the process in unsettlingly modern terms. Enki speaks of mixing the clay of the earth with the essence of a god, a description that many contemporary researchers interpret as the first instance of genetic engineering. This genetic intervention was not a singular event, but a carefully managed project. The Sumerian records suggest that the Anunnaki did not just create a labor force. They established a series of specific lineages to serve as intermediaries between the divine masters and the growing human population. This is where the concept of the 12 bloodlines begins to take shape. The tablets tell of 12 major administrative centers, each overseen by a prominent member of the Anunnaki Council. Each city-state, from Eridu to Nippur to Larsa, was a laboratory of governance and biology. Within these jurisdictions, the gods selected specific human families to receive the gift of kingship. As the Sumerian king list famously declares, kingship was lowered from heaven. To the Sumerian scribe, power was not something earned through merit or democracy. It was a matter of descent. The kings recorded in the lists often reigned for thousands of years, a detail that has long puzzled historians. While mainstream scholars dismiss these spans as symbolic or mythological, the documentary record remains steadfast. These were the long-lived offspring of the union between the Anunnaki and the daughters of men. They were the demigods, the Nephilim of biblical tradition, and they carried within them a specific frequency of genetic information that set them apart from the common worker. This essence, described in the texts as the Me, represented the fundamental laws of the universe and the technical knowledge required to maintain a functioning civilization. Enki is often portrayed as the secret benefactor of these lineages, while his brother Enlil, the lord of the air and the command, often viewed humanity as a noisy nuisance to be controlled or even eradicated. Enki was the protector. He was the one who whispered the secrets of the gods into the ears of his favored servants. Through him, the 12 bloodlines received the templates for mathematics, astronomy, law, and agriculture. The records suggest that these families were bred for a specific purpose. They were to be the custodians of the planet, the administrators who would ensure that the tribute continued to flow and that the order established by the Anunnaki remained undisturbed. The complexity of these cuneiform records is staggering. They provide detailed genealogies that stretch back into the antediluvian world, the world before the flood. They describe the division of the earth into 3 distinct regions, with a 4th region reserved exclusively for the gods. Within this structural framework, the 12 bloodlines were distributed across the globe, each tasked with maintaining the legacy of their divine patrons in their respective territories. The tablets describe the transfer of power through the generations, emphasizing that the right to rule was an immutable law of blood. If one lacked the divine spark of the Anunnaki, the throne was forever out of reach. As we look closer at the cuneiform genesis, the cinematic scale of the Sumerian vision becomes clear. It is a world of immense basalt temples, of ziggurats reaching toward the stars, and of a population that lived in the shadow of giants. The scribes meticulously recorded the movements of the stars, aligning their cities and their dynasties with the celestial cycles. They believed that the macrocosm of the heavens was reflected in the microcosm of the blood. The 12 bloodlines were mirrors of the 12 signs of the zodiac, a celestial clock that dictated the rise and fall of empires. But these records were not meant for the public. They were kept in the deepest recesses of the temple archives, accessible only to the high priests and the royalty. The knowledge of the bloodlines was the ultimate secret of statecraft. To know the origin of one's lineage was to know the source of one's power. The Sumerian records are filled with tales of usurpers who tried to fake their genealogies and the divine retribution that followed. The preservation of the blood was the highest priority, for if the lineage was broken, the connection to the divine masters would be lost. The whispers from Enki did not stop when the Sumerian language faded into the silence of history. The records were translated into Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian, The core truths of the 12 bloodlines were woven into the mythologies of the Hittites, the Egyptians, and the Greeks. Each culture renamed the gods and the kings, but the underlying structure remained the same. There were always 12 who sat on the council. There were always 12 tribes, 12 labors, and 12 disciples. The number 12 became the signature of the divine order on earth, a recurring motif that hints at an ancient and enduring system of control. Today, as we stand in the modern world, the clay tablets of Mesopotamia offer a challenging perspective. They suggest that the history we are taught in schools is only the surface of a much deeper and more complex reality. If the Sumerian records are accurate, then the foundations of our civilization were laid by beings who understood the power of the genome long before the invention of the microscope. These records invite us to consider the possibility that the 12 bloodlines established in the cradle of civilization did not simply vanish with the dust of the desert. Instead, they may have adapted, evolved, and migrated, moving through the centuries with the same obsession for lineage and power that characterized their ancestors in the Abzu. The investigation into these bloodlines is not merely an exercise in ancient history. It is a quest to understand the invisible architecture of the world we live in. The cuneiform Genesis provides the first clue, the first whisper from a god who claimed to be our maker. It sets the stage for a story of survival and influence that spans 5,000 years. As the winds of the desert continue to peel back the layers of the past, the message of the tablets becomes clearer. We are looking at the blueprint of a global dynasty, a hidden hand that has guided the destiny of humanity since the first word was pressed into clay. The origins of power are not found in the ballots of today, but in the blood of yesterday, a secret legacy born in the shadows of the Sumerian temples and whispered through the ages by the mouth of Enki. The story of the 12 has only just begun to be told. The scorched plains of Mesopotamia stretch toward the horizon, a landscape of dust and shimmering heat where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carve lines of life through the desert. It is here 5 millennia ago that the concept of organized power first crystallizes. In the shadow of the great ziggurats, the Sumerian scribes press reeds into wet clay, capturing a reality that defies modern understanding. They do not speak of elected leaders or social contracts. Instead, they document a descent. They record a moment when kingship was lowered from heaven. This is not merely a metaphor for authority. To the Sumerians, it is a biological and metaphysical event. The records suggest that the foundations of civilization were built upon a specific genetic blueprint, a gilded helix designed to endure through the ages. To understand the forging of these 12 dynasties, one must look at the Sumerian king list. This ancient document lists rulers whose reigns span tens of thousands of years. While modern historians often dismiss these numbers as mythological exaggerations, the Sumerians viewed them as a literal accounting of a different kind of biology. The rulers mentioned are not entirely human. They are described as being of the blood of the Anunnaki, the beings who came from above. The scribes detail a deliberate process of selection and refinement. They describe the creation of a ruling class that is separated from the common population by more than just wealth or education. They are separated by their essence. The forging of the 12 begins with the divine decrees known as the Mi. In Sumerian cosmology, the Mi are a set of rules and technologies that form the basis of civilization. They include the art of writing, the science of irrigation, the laws of justice, and the secrets of the priesthood. But among these decrees is the blueprint for the 12 lineages. The number 12 is not accidental. It reflects the Sumerian mastery of the cosmos, mirroring the 12 signs of the zodiac and the 12 months of the solar year. The scribes believe that for the earth to be in harmony with the heavens, the ruling structures of man must mirror the structures of the gods. The first of these dynasties are forged in the city of Eridu, the oldest of the Sumerian urban centers. Here, the god Enki, the master of wisdom and biology, is said to have established the first seat of power. The records describe Enki as a gardener of life, a deity who manipulates the very substance of existence. The texts suggest that the first bloodlines were created through a process of hybridization. The blood of the gods was mixed with the clay of the earth, creating a lineage that possessed the longevity and the intellect of the creators, combined with the physical resilience of the terrestrial inhabitants. This is the gilded helix, a genetic heritage designed to carry the weight of leadership and the burden of divine knowledge across generations. As civilization expands from Eridu to the cities of Kish, Uruk, and Uar, the 12 dynasties begin to take their specific shapes. Each house is granted a specific domain and a particular set of attributes. One lineage is forged for the mastery of war and the protection of the borders. Another is crafted for the preservation of the sacred rituals and the observation of the stars. A third is dedicated to the administration of the law and the management of the vast agricultural networks. These are not merely families. They are specialized biological units, each essential to the functioning of the whole. The Sumerian tablets describe these rulers as shepherds, but they are shepherds who are fundamentally different from their flock. The process of forging these dynasties is marked by a strict adherence to lineage and purity. The records detail elaborate marriage alliances and genealogical records that span centuries. The preservation of the bloodline is the highest priority. If the gilded helix is diluted, the Sumerians believe that the connection between the earth and the heavens will be severed, leading to chaos and the collapse of the city-states. This obsession with pedigree is the root of the concept of the divine right of kings. It is a belief that certain families are biologically destined to lead because they carry the original imprint of the creators. The influence of these 12 dynasties is not confined to the Fertile Crescent. As the centuries pass, the records suggest a dispersion. The gilded helix travels beyond the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates. We see the echoes of these 12 structures in the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 Olympian deities of Greece, and the 12 peers of Charlemagne. The Sumerian blueprint becomes the global standard for power. The scribes write of a time when the world was divided into regions, and each region was overseen by a representative of the original 12 lineages. This dispersion ensures that even as individual empires rise and fall, the underlying structure of the bloodlines remains intact. The nature of this influence is often subtle, operating beneath the surface of recorded history. The dynasties do not always rule from a throne. They are the architects of the systems that govern human life. They are the keepers of the calendars, the masters of the currency, and the guardians of the archives. In the Sumerian view, the power of the 12 is not just about physical force. It is about the control of information and the mastery of time. By dictating the stories that are told and the rituals that are followed, they shape the reality of the populations they oversee. The gilded helix is also associated with a specific type of physical and mental prowess. The ancient texts often describe the kings as being of great stature and possessing a wisdom that far exceeds that of the average man. They are the builders of the great works, the navigators of the seas, and the speakers of multiple languages. This excellence is attributed to their heritage. The records suggest that the genetic enhancements provided by the Anunnaki allow these rulers to perceive the world in ways that others cannot. They see the patterns in the stars and the cycles of the seasons as a coherent whole, allowing them to lead their people through times of plenty and times of famine. However, the forging of the 12 is not without conflict. The Sumerian myths are filled with stories of rivalry between the different houses. The House of Enki and the House of Enlil are often depicted in a struggle for supremacy, reflecting a tension between the pursuit of knowledge and the imposition of order. These internal conflicts within the 12 dynasties have shaped the course of human history, leading to wars, migrations, and the rise of new civilizations. Yet, despite these rivalries, the fundamental structure of the 12 remains. They are bound together by their shared origin and their shared purpose. The archaeological record provides tantalizing clues to the reality of these dynasties. In the royal tombs of Ur, archaeologists have discovered the remains of rulers buried with immense wealth and surrounded by the bodies of sacrificed attendants. The skeletal remains of these kings often show signs of a different diet and a different lifestyle than the general population, confirming their elite status. But it is the inscriptions that tell the true story. They speak of a lineage that goes back to the beginning of time, a chain of being that connects the current ruler to the gods themselves. This is the manifestation of the gilded helix in the physical world. As we look at the ruins of these ancient cities, the question remains: what happened to the 12 dynasties? Did they fade into the mists of time, or did they simply adapt to the changing world? The Sumerian records are clear. The kingship is eternal. Even when a city is destroyed, the kingship is simply moved to another location. The bloodlines do not vanish. They transform. They move from the ziggurats of Sumer to the palaces of Egypt, the temples of the Indus Valley, and the administrative centers of the modern world. The gilded helix is a constant, a thread of gold that runs through the tapestry of human existence. The forging of the 12 dynasties was a deliberate act of creation, designed to provide a stable framework for the development of human civilization. It established the hierarchies that define our world today and created a ruling class that views itself as the legitimate heirs to the wisdom of the creators. The story of the gilded helix is the story of how power was first defined and how it has been maintained for thousands of years. It is a story of biology, destiny, and the enduring influence of a hidden heritage. The 12 lineages are the architects of the world we inhabit. Their influence is woven into the very fabric of our societies, from the way we measure time to the way we structure our governments. As we move deeper into the records of the ancient past, the evidence of their presence becomes more difficult to ignore. The Sumerian tablets are not just stories of the past. They are a map of the present, revealing the hidden structures that continue to guide the destiny of the earth. The forge that was lit in the desert of Mesopotamia has never gone out. Its heat still radiates through the corridors of power, and its light still reflects off the gilded helix that continues to shape the human story. The landscape of southern Mesopotamia is a sprawling canvas of alluvial silt, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers wind like silver veins toward the Persian Gulf. It is here, 5,000 years ago, that the concept of the state is born from the mud. The sun beats down on a network of canals that carve the earth into a geometric puzzle of irrigation and intent. In this humid cradle, the transition from tribal wandering to urban permanence is not merely a change in lifestyle. It is the beginning of a structured hierarchy that will define human civilization for 5 millennia. The records etched into sun-dried clay suggest that this transition was not accidental. They speak of a deliberate bestowal of authority. The Sumerian king list remains one of the most provocative documents in the history of governance. It is a record of dynasties that stretches back into an era of mythic longevity, where reigns are measured in thousands of years. The document begins with a declaration that is both simple and chilling. It states that when kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. This sentence marks the initiation of the First Dominion. It establishes a precedent that power does not originate from the consent of the governed, but from a celestial mandate that is passed down through specific chosen vessels. These vessels are the first of the 12 bloodlines. In the city of Eridu, which the Sumerians believe to be the oldest city on Earth, the first name on the list is Alulim. He is the patriarch of a lineage that claims to be more than human. The records describe the kings of this pre-flood era as beings of immense stature and lifespan, suggesting a biological makeup that differs from the common population. This is the first appearance of the gilded helix in the historical record, a genetic signature that sets the rulers apart from the ruled. The narrator observes the ruins of Eridu today, where the great ziggurat of Enki once rose like a mountain above the marshes. Even now, the silence of the desert seems to hold the weight of that original authority. The authority of these early bloodlines is tied to the possession of the me. These are divine decrees, the fundamental blueprints of civilization. They include the arts of the blacksmith, the laws of the priesthood, the secrets of weaving, and the mechanics of the throne itself. To the Sumerians, the me are physical objects, perhaps technology or codified data, that the gods entrusted to the first kings. The bloodlines are the custodians of this knowledge. This creates a monopoly on progress. To have the blood of the king is to have the right to access the tools that build the world. As the centuries pass, the focus of power shifts from Eridu to other cities like Bad Tibra and Larik. Each shift marks a new branch of the 12 bloodlines asserting dominance. In Bad Tibra, the kingship is held by Enmenluana, who reportedly reigns for tens of thousands of years. While modern historians view these numbers as symbolic, the documentary perspective considers the underlying message. The Sumerians are recording a period where the rulers were perceived as timeless, or at least, as part of a continuous biological entity that did not fade like the lives of ordinary men. The bloodline is the immortal constant in a world of mortal change. Then comes the cataclysm. The Sumerian records speak of a great flood that sweeps over the land, intended to wipe the slate of humanity clean. But the bloodlines are not extinguished. The records detail how the seeds of kingship are preserved, hidden within the hull of a great vessel and sheltered by the gods who established the lines. When the waters recede, the kingship is lowered from heaven a second time. This time it descends upon the city of Kish. The post-flood era marks a significant evolution in the First Dominion. The reigns of the kings become shorter, aligning more closely with human biological limits. Yet the insistence on lineage remains absolute. The city of Kish becomes the center of a new imperial ambition. The first king after the flood is Jushur, but it is the 13th king of the dynasty, Etna, who captures the ancient imagination. He is described as the king who stabilized all the lands. He is also the king who ascended to heaven on the back of a great eagle to seek the plant of birth. This narrative reflects a desperate need for the bloodline to ensure its own continuity. The plant of birth is a metaphor for the preservation of the genetic sequence, the assurance that the guild helix will not be lost to the ravages of time or infertility. In the city of Uruk, a rival power center emerges. Here, the bloodlines take on a more heroic and aggressive character. We see the rise of Enmerkar, the builder of the city walls, and Lugalbanda, the traveler. These figures are not just administrators. They are archetypes of the warrior king who bridges the gap between the divine and the terrestrial. They are recorded as being 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. This specific ratio is a recurring theme in the records of the 12 bloodlines. It suggests a hybridization process, a deliberate mixing of celestial and earthly elements to create a superior caste of leaders. The narrative of Uruk reaches its zenith with Gilgamesh. He is the ultimate expression of the First Dominion. His quest for immortality is not just a personal journey, but a reflection of the Bloodlines' desire to reclaim the longevity of the pre-flood ancestors. He travels to the ends of the earth to speak with Ziusadra, the survivor of the flood, who holds the secrets of the old world. While Gilgamesh fails to find literal immortality, he secures the immortality of the lineage through his monuments and his laws. The gilded helix is woven into the very stones of the Uruk walls. The First Dominion is also defined by the shift from the An to the Lugal. In the earliest days, the An was a high priest who managed the city on behalf of the gods. The temple was the center of all economic and social life. But as the Bloodlines grew more entrenched, the role of the Lugal or the big man emerged. This was a king whose power was based on military might and dynastic inheritance rather than purely religious service. The palace began to rival the temple. This shift marks the moment when the Bloodlines moved from being stewards of the divine to being masters of the human. They established the first standing armies and the first systems of taxation. They turned the natural bounty of the Fertile Crescent into a concentrated engine of wealth that flowed upward to the throne. The influence of these Sumerian lineages did not vanish when their cities fell to the sands. The documentary perspective traces the movement of these families as they migrated and merged with emerging powers. The names change, the languages shift, but the patterns of governance remains the same. The concept of the divine right of kings, which would dominate European and Asian history for millennia, finds its blueprint here in the mud of Sumer. The 12 Bloodlines established a template of exclusivity. They taught the world that leadership is a matter of inheritance, and that the right to rule is written into the marrow of the bone. As we look at the ruins of Ur, where the great ziggurat still stands as a testament to the Third Dynasty, we see the culmination of this first era of dominion. King Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi created a bureaucratic marvel that tracked every sheep, every bushel of grain, and every laborer in the kingdom. They standardized weights and measures and codified the first laws. This was not just for the benefit of the people, but for the efficiency of the Bloodlines' control. The gilded helix proved its ability to organize human chaos into a productive and predictable machine. The first dominion of the Fertile Crescent was a period of profound creation and profound subjugation. It was the era when the boundaries of the human experience were first set by those who claimed a higher origin. The Sumerian records are more than just myths. They are the ledger of a takeover. They describe a world where the heavens reached down and touched the earth, leaving behind a permanent mark in the form of 12 families who would never let go of the reins of power. The heat from those ancient thrones still resonates. The structures of society we inhabit today, from the way we gather in cities to the way we recognize authority, are the echoes of those first kings who sat in Eridu and Kish. They were the architects of the First Dominion, and their blueprint remains the foundation of the world we know. The story of the gilded helix is only beginning, as the lines of power start to stretch out from the riverbanks toward the horizons of the unknown world. The dust of the Mesopotamian plains does not settle so much as it migrates, carried by the relentless winds that sweep across the Tigris and Euphrates. As the great city-states of Sumer begin to fracture under the weight of climate shifts and internal strife, the 12 Bloodlines do not simply vanish into the annals of history. They evolve. They realize that power is most resilient when it is mobile, and so begins a movement that historians often overlook, a quiet exodus of the elite families who carry with them the blueprints of civilization. This is the silent diaspora, a period where the gilded helix spreads its reach beyond the Fertile Crescent, tracing the early veins of what will eventually become the Silk Road. The camera of history pans across the rugged terrain of the Iranian plateau. Here, the first wave of the diaspora finds its footing. These are not refugees seeking survival, but architects of influence seeking new foundations. The Sumerian records hint at specialized groups, families tasked with the management of metals, the observation of the stars, and the administration of law. As they move eastward, they bring with them the cylinder seals and the complex accounting systems that define Sumerian governance. They integrate into the emerging cultures of the Elamites and the early nomadic tribes of the north, not by conquest, but by becoming indispensable. They are the advisors to the first kings of the mountains, the keepers of the high secrets of irrigation and celestial navigation. As we move further along the northern rim of the Hindu Kush, the landscape becomes more unforgiving. Yet, the archaeological record shows a strange consistency. In the ruins of the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, located in modern-day Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, researchers have found artifacts that mirror the sophistication of the Sumerian courts. The 12 bloodlines operate like a guild of governors, establishing fortified oases that serve as the early nodes of global trade. These are not merely stopovers for merchants. They are laboratories for a new kind of societal structure. In these remote outposts, the bloodlines refine the art of the merchant priest, blending economic control with spiritual authority. The narrative shifts to the vast, shimmering expanse of the Taklamakan Desert. For centuries, this region was thought to be a barrier, a place where life went to die. But the discovery of the Darim mummies has challenged everything we thought we knew about ancient migration. These figures, preserved by the salt and the dry air, possess features that are distinctly different from the local populations. They are tall, with light hair and Caucasian features, buried with textiles that reflect the weaving patterns of the West. While mainstream history struggles to explain their presence, the esoteric records suggest these individuals were the outriders of the gilded helix. They were the genetic ambassadors sent to the edge of the rising Eastern powers, ensuring that the influence of the 12 lineages would have a seat at the table of the early Chinese dynasties. This expansion is not a random scattering. It is a strategic deployment. The bloodlines understand that the world is becoming interconnected, and to control the whole, they must control the junctions. They position themselves at the mountain passes, the river crossings, and the desert wells. They become the masters of logistics, the unseen hand that facilitates the flow of lapis lazuli, gold, and silk. By controlling the movement of goods, they control the movement of ideas. The concept of the divine right of kings, a hallmark of Sumerian theology, begins to appear in various forms across the Asian continent. The idea that certain families are chosen by the heavens to rule is not a coincidence of cultural evolution. It is a seed planted by the diaspora. In the Indus Valley, the influence of these lineages is felt in the rigid urban planning of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. The precision of their brickwork, the sophistication of their drainage systems, and their standardized weights and measures all point to a familiar administrative hand. The Sumerian texts speak of Maluha, a land of great wealth to the east, and the records suggest a constant exchange of high-ranking personnel between the two regions. These are the 12 families at work, weaving their genetic and intellectual threads into the fabric of the Indian subcontinent. They do not seek to erase the local culture. They seek to refine it, to organize it, and to place themselves at the apex of its emerging hierarchy. As the centuries pass, the bloodlines become masters of camouflage. They learn to adopt the names, the languages, and the customs of the lands they inhabit. In the courts of the early Persian emperors, they are the magi, the wise men who interpret dreams and manage the imperial treasury. In the shifting empires of the steppe, they are the shamans and the strategic advisors to the khanates. They understand that names can be forgotten, but blood remains constant. They maintain their cohesion through secret traditions and carefully arranged marriages, creating a hidden network that spans from the Mediterranean to the Yellow Sea. The silent diaspora is also a period of profound technological transfer. The wheels of the chariots that thunder across the plains of Eurasia are descendants of the Sumerian design. The mathematics used to calculate interest on a loan in a Han Dynasty market can be traced back to the base 60 system of the Mesopotamian temple mounds. The bloodlines are the carriers of this software of civilization. They provide the tools that make empires possible, and in exchange, they are granted a level of immunity and influence that transcends borders. While kings rise and fall, and while borders are redrawn in blood, the families of the gilded helix remain, their status protected by their utility to those in power. Consider the role of the scribe. In the ancient world, literacy was not a common skill. It was a sacred craft. The Sumerian lineages possessed a monopoly on the written word for generations. As they moved along the Silk Road, they established schools and scriptoriums. They taught the art of record-keeping, ensuring that the history of the world would be written from their perspective. This control over information is perhaps their most enduring legacy. By deciding what was recorded and what was erased, they shaped the collective memory of humanity. The shadows they cast across the Silk Road are not just physical. They are intellectual. The documentary gaze now settles on the modern remnants of these ancient routes. Today, we see the echoes of the diaspora in the global banking systems and the international trade organizations that govern our world. The interconnectedness we take for granted in the 21st century is the final flowering of the seeds planted during the silent diaspora. The 12 bloodlines realized early on that a single city could be destroyed, a single empire could collapse, but a network is indestructible. They moved from the riverbanks to the roads, and from the roads to the sea, always staying one step ahead of the cycles of decay that claim lesser lineages. The story of the gilded helix in this era is one of patience. They are willing to wait generations for a strategic marriage to bear fruit or for a trade route to become profitable. They operate on a timeline that is far longer than the average human life, a perspective granted by their belief in their ancient and celestial origins. As they settle into the bustling markets of Samarkand, the coastal enclaves of the Levant, and the royal courts of the East, they are no longer just Sumerians. They are the global elite, a silent caste that recognizes its own across any language or border. As we look at the maps of the ancient world, we see the lines of trade as simple strokes of ink. But if we could see the genetic and social reality, these lines would be pulsing with the energy of a specific and directed intent. The Silk Road was the nervous system of the ancient world, and the 12 bloodlines were the impulses traveling through it, directing the growth and the behavior of the global organism. They have moved into the shadows, but their influence has never been more pervasive. The diaspora has reached its destination, not in a single place, but in the very structure of our global civilization. The journey from the ziggurats to the Great Wall was not a retreat. It was an ascension. The families who once walked the streets of Ur and Nippur have successfully transposed their power onto a much larger canvas. They have become the ghosts in the machine of history, the silent architects of the world we inhabit. As the sun sets over the desert dunes that once hid their secrets, we are left to wonder how many of our modern institutions are merely the contemporary iterations of the systems they established thousands of years ago. The shadows across the Silk Road have grown long, reaching into the present day, reminding us that the past is never truly behind us. It is simply waiting to be recognized in the faces of those who still hold the keys to the world. As the sun sets on the classical world, a period of perceived darkness falls across the European continent. Historians often speak of the Middle Ages as a time of intellectual stagnation, a 1,000-year gap between the glory of Rome and the rebirth of the Renaissance. Yet, beneath the surface of this feudal landscape, the ancient lineages identified in the Sumerian tablets are not merely surviving. They are undergoing a strategic metamorphosis. This is the era of the occultation, a term derived from the Latin word for hiding. The 12 bloodlines, having once ruled openly as god-kings in the Fertile Crescent and as emperors in the Mediterranean, now transition into the shadows. They exchange their golden crowns for the humble robes of the monk, the heavy armor of the crusader, and the intricate ledgers of the merchant. In the damp stone cloisters of remote monasteries, the work of preservation begins. While the common population loses the ability to read and write, select groups within the church hierarchy become the custodians of forbidden knowledge. These are not merely religious scholars. They are the genetic and intellectual heirs to the Sumerian priesthood. In scriptoriums lit by flickering tallow candles, they transcribe ancient texts, often hiding Sumerian astronomical data and genealogical records within the margins of illuminated manuscripts. To the uninitiated, these are simply decorations or prayers. To those who hold the key, they are a continuation of a map that spans millennia. The 12 lines understand that during this era of chaos, information is more valuable than territory. They consolidate their power by becoming the sole mediators between the earthly realm and the divine, utilizing the structure of the church to mask a much older agenda. By the 11th century, the strategy of the occultation shifts from preservation to expansion. The Crusades are often portrayed as a series of holy wars driven by religious zeal. However, when viewed through the lens of the ancient bloodlines, a different narrative emerges. The families that orchestrate these campaigns are the same lines that can trace their heritage back to the city-states of Ur and Lagash. Their primary objective in the Levant is not merely the capture of Jerusalem, but the recovery of physical artifacts and documents buried beneath the ruins of the ancient world. The Knights Templar, a military order that rises to unprecedented power during this time, functions as an operational arm for these lineages. They are the first international bankers, creating a system of credit and exchange that bypasses the traditional boundaries of the feudal state. This financial infrastructure is the direct descendant of the temple banking systems of ancient Mesopotamia, adapted for a medieval world. The wealth accumulated during the Crusades allows these bloodlines to weave themselves into the very fabric of European nobility. This is the birth of heraldry, an elaborate system of symbols that serves as a coded language for the 12 families. The lions, eagles, serpents, and lilies that adorn the shields of the aristocracy are not random choices. They are ancient markers of specific genetic strands. A coat of arms is a biological signature, a way for members of the lineages to identify one another across borders and through generations without ever speaking a word. The concept of blue blood emerges during this period, reinforcing the idea that the nobility possesses a literal biological difference from the peasantry. This is a medieval echoes of the Sumerian claim that kingship was lowered from heaven, a divine right granted to a specific set of people whose ancestry is tied to the stars. As the feudal system begins to crystallize, the 12 bloodlines establish what will become the great houses of Europe. They practice strict endogamy, marrying only within their own circles to ensure the purity of their inherited traits. While they may fight wars against one another on the surface, beneath the conflict lies a series of cloistered councils. These are private gatherings where the heads of the lines meet to manage the long-term direction of human society. They are the architects behind the throne, the advisors who whisper into the ears of kings, and the cardinals who dictate the policy of the papacy. They operate through a network of secret societies and craft guilds, most notably the precursors to the Freemasons, who carry the mathematical and architectural secrets of the Sumerian ziggurats into the construction of the great cathedrals. These cathedrals are more than just houses of worship. They are stone books, encoded with sacred geometry and celestial alignments that date back to the earliest records of the Mesopotamian valley. The Gothic style, with its soaring arches and stained glass, is designed to evoke a specific psychological state, a sense of awe that reinforces the authority of the invisible rulers. The 12 bloodlines use these structures to anchor their power in the physical landscape, creating a network of energetic nodes across the continent. While the peasants labor in the fields, the lineages are focused on the stars, maintaining the ancient tradition of tracking the great cycles of time known as the precession of the equinoxes. As the 14th century approaches, a series of crises begins to shake the medieval order. The Black Death, the Great Famine, and the 100 Years' War threaten to destabilize the control of the lineages. However, these events provide an opportunity for a great reset. The bloodlines use the chaos to consolidate their land holdings and move their wealth into the burgeoning city-states of Italy and the Low Countries. This is where the medieval occultation begins to transition into the early modern era. The focus shifts from the control of land to the control of capital. The families of the 12, such as the early banking dynasties in Florence and Venice, realize that by controlling the flow of money, they can control the destiny of nations more effectively than through any standing army. The libraries of the Vatican and the private collections of the merchant princes become the new repositories for the Sumerian wisdom. During this time, the translation of the Corpus Hermeticum and other ancient texts sparks the Renaissance. While the public is told this is a rediscovery of Greek and Roman thought, the inner circles know it is the re-emergence of the pre-Diluvian knowledge they have been guarding for centuries. The occultation is not an end to their influence, but a refinement of it. They have learned that the most effective way to rule is to remain unseen, to become the invisible hand that guides the markets, the church, and the state. The transition from the medieval to the modern world is orchestrated by these same 12 threads. They are the silent partners in the voyages of discovery, seeking to reconnect with lost branches of their lineages in the Americas and the East. They are the patrons of the arts and the sciences, ensuring that human progress follows a path that does not threaten their ultimate sovereignty. The medieval period, far from being a time of stagnation, was the crucible in which the modern power structure was forged. It was a time of internal consolidation, where the bloodlines perfected the art of the long game. As we look at the ruins of the medieval world today, we see only the crumbling stone of castles and the hushed aisles of cathedrals. But the true legacy of that era is not found in the physical remains. It is found in the enduring structures of power that were established in the dark. The councils that met in secret rooms, the oaths sworn in candlelit crypts, and the genetic pacts made in the royal chambers of Europe are still active today. The medieval occultation was a necessary phase, a strategic retreat that allowed the 12 bloodlines to survive the collapse of the ancient world and prepare for the conquest of the modern one. They remain the silent observers of history, waiting for the moment when the shadows are no longer necessary, and they can once again step into the light of the sun as the undisputed masters of the earth. The echoes of Sumer did not fade in the Middle Ages. They grew louder, vibrating through the stone and the blood of an era that was designed to hide the very truth it was built to preserve. The medieval period was the bridge, a span of time where the ancient gods became the hidden masters, preparing the world for an age of global dominion that was centuries in the making. As the sun sets on the feudal landscape of old Europe and Asia, a new dawn breaks over the counting houses and maritime ports of the Enlightenment. The transition is not a loss of power for the ancient lineages, but a sophisticated shedding of skin. The heavy iron crowns of the medieval kings are melted down, transformed into the invisible currency of the modern era. We are entering the age of the merchant prince, where the battlefield shifts from the mud of the frontier to the polished wood of the boardroom. The 12 bloodlines, whose roots reach back to the ziggurats of Sumer, realize that direct rule by divine right is becoming a liability in an age of rising literacy and revolution. To maintain their grip on the human story, they must become the architects of the systems themselves. They move from the throne to the ledger, from the sword to the bond. The transformation begins in the late 17th century with the birth of the modern financial system. We observe the creation of the Bank of England in 1694, a pivotal moment where private wealth is permanently tethered to the debt of nations. This is the masterstroke of the ancient lineages. By controlling the issuance of currency, they no longer need to lead armies into battle. They simply fund both sides of every conflict, ensuring that regardless of the victor, the debt remains and the interest grows. This is the alchemy of the modern age, turning paper and promise into absolute control over the physical world. The Sumerian concept of the keeper of the tablets evolves into the central banker, the silent arbiter of who prospers and who fails. The lens of history shifts to the sprawling docks of London, Amsterdam, and Venice. The great chartered companies, such as the East India Company, emerge as the first multinational corporations. These are not merely businesses, they are sovereign entities with their own armies, their own laws, and their own intelligence networks. They are the vessels through which the ancient bloodlines project their power across the oceans. We see the wealth of India, Africa, and the Americas being siphoned back to the ancestral seats of power in Europe. This is the consolidation of the global order. The 12 families understand that gold is finite, but the control of trade routes and resources is the true key to longevity. They begin to weave a web of global interdependence that makes national borders increasingly irrelevant to those at the very top of the pyramid. By the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution provides a new engine for this ancient ambition. The bloodlines identify that the mastery of energy is the mastery of life itself. We watch as the dynasties of coal, oil, and steel rise to prominence. Names that will become synonymous with philanthropy and progress in the public eye are, in reality, the modern incarnations of the Sumerian priest kings. They dominate the landscape, building cities that are designed for efficiency and production rather than the human spirit. The masses are moved from the fields to the factories, creating a new type of peasantry that is dependent on the systems of the hegemon for every basic need. The architects of this order understand that a person who relies on a paycheck is far easier to manage than a person who owns their own land. The 20th century arrives with a thunderous roar, a period of unprecedented carnage and rapid technological advancement. From our documentary perspective, the two world wars are not seen as tragic accidents of diplomacy, but as massive restructuring events. These conflicts serve to break the last vestiges of the old monarchies and the traditional social structures that stood in the way of a truly globalized system. Out of the ashes of the Great Wars, we see the emergence of the international institutions that define our modern world. The League of Nations and later the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank are established. These are the cathedrals of the modern hegemon. They represent a new level of governance that sits above the reach of the average voter, directed by the same lineages that have guided the course of civilization since the dawn of recorded time. In this era, the bloodlines perfect the art of the invisible hand. They realize that the most effective way to rule is to convince the populace that they are free. We observe the rise of mass media and the sophisticated techniques of psychological manipulation. The education systems are standardized, not to create thinkers, but to create workers and consumers who operate within the parameters set by the architects. The narrative is carefully curated through newspapers, radio, and eventually television. The ancient symbols of the 12 bloodlines are hidden in plain sight, embedded in corporate logos, national seals, and the very architecture of the world's capital cities. To the uninitiated, these are merely aesthetic choices, but to those who know the history, they are markers of a continuous and unbroken legacy. The transition to the digital age marks the most recent and perhaps most profound shift in this long narrative. The bloodlines move their focus from the physical control of land and labor to the control of information and data. We see the rise of the technocracy, a system where decisions are made by an elite group of experts and algorithms rather than through the messy process of democratic debate. The ancient records of Sumer spoke of the gods who kept the lists of every living thing, and today, we see this vision realized in the vast server farms that track every transaction, every movement, and every thought of the global population. The modern hegemon is no longer just a political or financial entity, it is a digital one. As we look at the boardrooms of the world's most powerful investment firms and the inner circles of the global policy forums, the faces may change, but the underlying structure remains remarkably consistent. The wealth of the world is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, a trend that mirrors the ancient hierarchies of the city-states. The architects of the global order are now focused on the final integration of the human experience into their system. They speak of the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, terms that mask a very old desire for total harmony through total control. The 12 bloodlines are preparing for a future where the distinction between the biological and the technological is blurred, ensuring their influence extends into the very fabric of human evolution. This is the state of the modern hegemon. It is a system built on centuries of planning, a grand design that has survived the rise and fall of empires. The ancient bloodlines have proven to be the ultimate survivors, adapting to every social and technological change with cold, calculating precision. They have moved from the shadows of the temples to the bright lights of the global stage, yet they remain just as elusive as ever. The global order is not a conspiracy in the traditional sense, but a natural expression of a lineage that believes it was born to lead the human race. We see their work in the skylines of our cities, in the fluctuations of the markets, and in the laws that govern our lives. They are the silent partners in every human endeavor, the architects who remain at the drawing board long after the builders have gone home. The documentary lens now widens to encompass the entire globe, a shimmering web of light and data. We see that the ancient Sumerian records were not just accounts of the past, but blueprints for a future that is now our present. The 12 bloodlines continue their work, guided by a sense of purpose that spans millennia. They do not think in terms of years or decades, but in terms of epochs. As we stand on the precipice of a new era, the question remains whether the human spirit will continue to operate within the structures of the architects, or if the ancient patterns will finally be broken by a world that is beginning to remember its own origins. For now, the hegemon remains, a monument to the enduring power of the bloodlines and their vision of a world unified under their eternal gaze. This is the reality of our modern age, a world designed by the few, inhabited by the many, and governed by an order as old as the stars. The weight of this continuity is felt in every aspect of modern life. We see it in the way cities are planned to funnel movement, in the way time itself is standardized and sold back to us, and in the way the very concept of value is defined by those who hold the keys to the treasury. The modern hegemon has created a world where escape is increasingly difficult, not because of walls and bars, but because the system is designed to be all-encompassing. It is a masterpiece of social engineering, a culmination of the wisdom gathered over 5,000 years of rule. The architects have succeeded in creating a global civilization that mirrors the ancient Sumerian ideal of a perfectly ordered society, where every person has a place and every place is known to the keepers of the records. As we conclude this observation of the modern era, we are left with the image of a world that is both incredibly advanced and deeply ancient. The technology is new, the institutions are modern, but the hands that move the pieces have been playing this game since the first words were carved into clay. The 12 bloodlines remain the quiet masters of the global order, the architects who continue to shape the destiny of the earth from the shadows of the very structures they have built. The story of the modern hegemon is the story of the ancient gods made manifest in the machines and markets of today, a testament to the enduring legacy of the Sumerian bloodlines. The shifting sands of the Iraqi desert hold more than the ruins of ziggurats and the dust of fallen kings. Deep within the subterranean layers of the Fertile Crescent, archaeologists and linguists have long puzzled over a specific gap in the historical record. While the Nineveh library of Ashurbanipal yielded thousands of clay tablets, there has always been a whisper among the inner circles of Sumerian scholarship regarding a final set of instructions. This is the legend of the 10th tablet, a document that is said to serve as both a ledger and a countdown. In the quiet corridors of the world's most prestigious museums, the possibility of this tablet's existence is treated with a mixture of academic curiosity and genuine dread. The 10th tablet is not merely a record of what has passed, but a blueprint for what is to come. It represents the transition from the era of hidden rule to the era of total revelation. For thousands of years, the 12 bloodlines have operated under a mandate of absolute discretion. Their power was built on the foundation of the unseen, a complex architecture of influence that relied on the ignorance of the masses. The Sumerian records suggest that this secrecy was never intended to be permanent. Instead, it was a tactical necessity, a period of incubation during which the terrestrial structures of the gods could be rebuilt by human hands. The tablets speak of a great year, a precessional cycle of nearly 26,000 years, divided into ages that dictate the rise and fall of civilizations. We are currently navigating the turbulent waters of a transitional period, moving from one age into the next. According to the ancient scripts, this transition marks the expiration of the veil. The shadows that have protected the bloodlines for millennia are beginning to lengthen and thin, exposing the roots of a system that has governed the earth since the dawn of recorded time. The prophecy of the 10th tablet describes a moment when the sky and the earth exchange secrets. In the modern context, this is often interpreted as the convergence of ancient biological heritage and advanced technological surveillance. The bloodlines have spent centuries cultivating a world of total connectivity, a global nervous system composed of fiber optic cables and satellite arrays. This network was designed to be the ultimate tool of management, allowing for the real-time monitoring of every human transaction and thought. However, the 10th tablet warns that the very tools of control will eventually become the instruments of exposure. The digital age has acted as a catalyst for the end of secrecy. As information becomes more fluid, the carefully constructed narratives of the 12 families are beginning to dissolve. The public is no longer looking at history as a series of random events, but as a deliberate progression orchestrated by an invisible hand. In the high offices of global finance and the secluded laboratories of genetic research, the descendants of the Sumerian elite are aware that the clock is ticking. The records indicate that the authority granted to these lineages was bound by a specific temporal decree. When the stars align in a particular configuration, the mandate of the stewards is meant to be reviewed. This is the reckoning spoken of in the fragmented verses of the Lost Tablet. It suggests that the 12 bloodlines are not the masters of the earth, but its temporary guardians, answering to a higher, perhaps extraterrestrial, intelligence that established the original order in Mesopotamia. As this realization permeates the collective consciousness, the tension between the ruling elite and the governed population reaches a breaking point. The elite are no longer seen as divinely appointed leaders, but as occupants of a system whose lease is rapidly coming to an end. The role of the 12th bloodline is particularly crucial in this final stage. Often referred to as the keepers of the gate, this lineage has historically been responsible for the preservation of the records and the maintenance of the timeline. While the other 11 families focused on the tangible aspects of power like gold, energy, and politics, the 12th family remained in the background, ensuring that the ancient knowledge was never truly lost. They are the librarians of the occult, the ones who understand the true meaning of the cuneiform prophecies. It is through their channels that the contents of the 10th tablet have begun to leak into the public domain. Whether this is a deliberate act of betrayal against their peers or a fulfillment of a cosmic requirement remains a subject of intense debate among those who follow the trail of the bloodlines. As the secrecy ends, the physical world begins to reflect the internal collapse of the old order. We see this in the sudden and inexplicable shifts in geopolitical alliances and the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence. The Sumerian records describe a time when the language of the gods would be rediscovered by the common man. In the present day, this language is the code of DNA and the binary of the machine. By deciphering the human genome, we are essentially reading the original tablets of destiny written into our very cells. The 12 bloodlines have long claimed a monopoly on this biological divinity, asserting that their blood is purer and closer to the source. But as genetic testing becomes a consumer commodity, the myth of the exclusive bloodline is being challenged. The secrets of the laboratory are mirroring the secrets of the temple, and both are being brought into the light of day. The cinematic scale of this unveiling is reflected in the way modern society responds to crises. Each upheaval, whether economic or environmental, is now scrutinized for the fingerprints of the ancient lineages. The public is beginning to recognize the repeating patterns of Sumerian governance in the structures of modern international organizations. The 10th tablet foretells a period of intense confusion, where the old gods are unmasked and the new masters have yet to emerge. It is a time of extreme volatility, as the systems built on the principle of hidden influence struggle to adapt to a world where nothing can remain hidden for long. The high-budget surveillance state, once the pride of the ruling class, is now a double-edged sword that records their own movements and indiscretions as clearly as it does those of the citizenry. The prophecy also speaks of a return, not necessarily a physical descent of ancient deities from the heavens, but a return of the primordial consciousness that defined the first civilization. The Sumerian records suggest that the end of secrecy is the beginning of a new form of sovereignty. As the 12 bloodlines lose their grip on the narrative of history, the individual is forced to confront the reality of their own heritage. The 10th tablet suggests that the power once concentrated in the hands of a few is destined to be redistributed. This is the great fear of the elite, the reason for the increasing desperation seen in global policies and the tightening of digital controls. They are fighting against a chronological inevitability, a change in the season of human existence that no amount of wealth or technology can prevent. In the final analysis, the story of the 10th tablet is the story of humanity coming of age. We are moving past the childhood of blind obedience to unseen masters and into a mature realization of our place in a larger, older, and more complex cosmic hierarchy. The ruins of Eridu and Nippur are not just graveyards of the past. They are the foundations upon which the future is being built. The end of secrecy is not an end in itself, but a doorway. It is the moment when the lights are turned on in the grand theater of history, revealing the actors, the stagehands, and the architects who have been working in the dark for thousands of years. The script of the 12 Bloodlines is reaching its final pages, and the audience is finally standing up to see who has been directing the play. As the sun sets over the modern skylines that mimic the silhouettes of ancient temples, the legacy of the Sumerian records feels more relevant than ever. The prophecy of the 10th tablet is unfolding in real time, manifesting in the headlines of today and the technologies of tomorrow. We are the witnesses to the closing of a cycle that began in the marshes of the Persian Gulf and is now culminating in the globalized, interconnected world of the 21st century. The silence of the desert has been broken, and the voices of the ancients are speaking through the machines, the markets, and the very air we breathe. The veil is gone, and the era of the hidden rulers is giving way to a future that is as uncertain as it is inevitable. The 10th tablet has been read, and the world will never be the same.